Io Amiki! I'm Chef Benny, and welcome back to Reheated History, the show that's trying its best to be honest about how it would go down if you actually time traveled on your own. It would not go well. As a history teacher, I'm always looking for new and delicious ways to connect with the past. What did the common medieval peasant eat? What fueled the Roman gladiator? Did colonial Americans have a favorite comfort food? The answers aren't in textbooks, they're in the kitchens, farms, and fire pits of history. So, each week we'll cook our way through time, one humble, hopefully hilarious, and surprisingly tasty dish at a time. Because the best way to understand history is with our stomachs. This is Reheated History. If you're new here, we're still in ancient Rome. This is our month-long, 4-part series on Roman fast food. And because a 2020 Pompeii excavation turned up a shockingly intact ancient Thermopolium, I decided that one episode wasn't enough. Not for the food and not for the history behind it. So we're spending the whole month working through that ancient menu and everything that shaped it. Today, we're making ancient Roman pea soup served with a side of political commentary. My favorite. Today we're looking at the dark, dangerous, and corrupt reality of housing in ancient Rome. We often imagine the Roman Empire as a place of grand marble palaces, white pillars, and sprawling private villas. But if you were part of the bottom 90%, a working-class plebeian, a craftsman, a day laborer, a freed slave, your living situation looked a lot less like a palace and a lot more like a cramped, flammable nightmare. The average working-class Roman lived in tall and often, but not always, poorly constructed multi-story apartments called insulae. These buildings were thrown up 6, 7, sometimes 8 stories high using cheap timber framing, sun-dried mud bricks, and low-grade crumbling concrete. They were notoriously unstable. Slum landlords, including famous Roman politicians like Cicero, made astronomical fortunes renting out tiny, poorly lit rooms in these death traps. Landlords would build extra wooden floors on top of these existing buildings using shoddy materials to squeeze out a little more rental income, leading to frequent, catastrophic building collapses. The Roman satirical poet Juvenal wrote bitterly about the sheer terror of living in Insula, writing, "We inhabit a city supported for the most part by slender props. That is how the landlord holds up the tottering house, patching up gaping cracks in the old wall, bidding the tenants sleep at ease under a roof, ready to tumble about their ears." Another writer, Marshall, recorded watching an entire 7-story apartment building collapse into dust right during dinner, crushing dozens of families who never even had a chance to run. Turns out having a kitchen is something that the 1% would have. These wooden apartment blocks had no indoor plumbing, no running water above ground floor, no chimneys, and 0 fire safety standards. So if you lived on the 5th floor, you had to haul every single bucket of water up narrow wooden staircases from a public fountain on the street. Starting an open fire on your 3rd floor wooden room to cook dinner or to keep warm in winter was a genuine death trap. If your charcoal brazier tipped over or an oil lamp spilled onto a straw mattress, you wouldn't just burn your room down, you'd incinerate the entire block and kill hundreds of your neighbors. Upper floor tenants had no fire escapes. Narrow stairwells that choked with smoke instantly and wooden balconies that allowed flames to leap across narrow, 2-foot alleys to the next building with alarming speed. But if you want the real villain of the Roman real estate, forget Cicero. Meet Marcus Linicus Crassus. If that name sounds familiar, he was in the famous political alliance with Julius Caesar. That's the first triumvirate, if you remember your history class. He was one of the richest men who ever lived, and one way he gained his wealth was a bit sketchy and very illegal by today's standards. Crassus kept a private brigade of 500 trained slaves on standby for fires. Cool, right? What a great Samaritan. Here's the catch. When a building caught fire, his crew wouldn't lift a finger until Crassus personally negotiated to buy the burning building and everything next to it off the terrified owner at the lowest possible price. Only after the ownership officially changed hands would he give the order to actually put out the fire. Refused to sell? Well, he would just let it burn to the ground and then he'd buy the empty lot for even less tomorrow. Give that practice enough time and a huge chunk of Rome's real estate ends up in one guy's pocket. Because fires were such a consistent threat to the city's survival, Roman municipal laws heavily restricted open flames in residential quarters. Emperor Augustus had to create Rome's first public fire brigade called the Vigiles, and he capped building heights at 70 feet, a limit later dropped to 60 feet by Trajan after repeated catastrophic neighborhood fires. Emperor Nero famously restructured building codes after the Great Fire of 64 CE. You know, that's the one with the fiddle. He banned shared walls between insulae and mandated stone porticos specifically to address the dangerous wooden structures of the working class slums. This created a massive daily logistical problems for millions of everyday people. So how do you get a hot meal if cooking at home is a fire hazard, a structural nightmare, and a legal liability? The answer brings us back to the Thermopolium. Fast food wasn't a modern luxury or a lazy weekend treat for the Romans. It was a literal, legal, environmental, and structural necessity. If you weren't able to grab your hot food from a street vendor on the way home from work, you were eating cold, stale bread in the dark. If you couldn't light a fire in your third-floor wooden room, what could you keep on your shelves for a late-night snack or for breakfast? The Roman Insulae pantry was built entirely around shelf-stable, zero-cook comfort foods. Your morning staple was probably coarse, dark wheat or spelt bread, like panis quadratus, which you'd aggressively dip into a bowl of pasca, like a refreshing mixture of water and cheap sour wine vinegar to soften the stale crust. You'd layer that with slabs of sheep's milk ricotta or aged goat cheese, brine-cured black olives, salted sardines, dried figs, handfuls of walnuts or chestnuts. If you wanted something a little more gourmet, you made moritum, a popular garlic and herb cheese spread made by pounding herbs, garlic, salt, olive oil, and hard cheese together in a stone mortar. It was basically ancient Roman Boursin cheese eaten cold on a crusty bread. You had food at home, but it was all dry, preserved, and cold, which meant the moment you craved steaming, piping hot bowl of seasoned stew, a seared sausage, hot lentils, your cold pantry setup wasn't going to cut it. You had to throw on your tunic, walk down these rickety wooden stairs, and hit the Thermopolium. It's well documented that they stayed open after the sunset to serve travelers, workers, or people wanting to live it up for a social hour. Kind of like my local Denny's when I was a kid, just, no graveyard shift. And while the ultra-wealthy elites were lying on silk couches eating multi-course feasts of roasted peacock and flamingo tongue, the working poor relied on affordable, nutrient-dense street stall legumes. The undisputed king of these street vendor meals was a thick, savory yellow pea and herb mash called Vitellius Peas, or Pulmentum, named after the 1st century emperor Aulus Vitellius, who ruled for only 8 extremely chaotic months in 69 CE, and he was famous throughout history for his legendary unhinged appetite, which once again falls into my favorite category of culinary history, food served with a side of political satire. And when I use the word unhinged, I mean it. Vitellius took the throne in 69 CE, one of 4 different emperors that year alone. He was number 3. And by Suetonius's account, he ate 4 full banquets a day, often at different noblemen's houses each time, allegedly making himself throw up between meals just to make room for more. His signature dish was a massive silver platter he nicknamed the Shield of Minerva. It was a mashup of pike liver, pheasant, and peacock brains, flamingo tongues, and lamprey melt, supposedly gathered by imperial warships sailing all the way from Parthia, that's northeastern Iran, to the Spanish coast, just to fill one plate for dinner. A little side note, in the previous episode, I gave a quick story on Apicus, which I did mention. He also wrote on several occasions that flamingo tongue is exceptionally tasty. I guess I'll have to try it. But I'm going to need a flamingo guy. If you got a flamingo guy, leave his contact in the comments. I'm just kidding. I don't need to try it. I don't even know if it's legal. Is flamingo tongue legal? Anyway, enough of Roman excess. Let's focus on my people, the plebes. The actual working people of Rome. They got a bowl of peas named in his honor, and I think there's a hint in there somewhere about who really keeps an empire running. To build an authentic bowl of 1st century Roman street peas, you're going to need 2 cups of dried yellow split peas or green split peas. I couldn't find yellow split peas anywhere, so I went with green. Soaked overnight. 3 cups of water or vegetable stock, 1 large leek finely chopped, 1 tablespoon of Roman Garum, 1 tablespoon of honey, 1 tablespoon of white wine vinegar, 1 teaspoon of ground cumin and 1 teaspoon of cracked black pepper, and 1 handful of fresh mint and parsley finely chopped. Then you're going to need 2 tablespoons of olive oil. All right, let's knock out this Roman street staple. Start by draining your soaked split peas and dropping them into a heavy pot with 3 cups of water or vegetable stock. I had a bit of senior moment at the age of 46, and I forgot that I bought vegetable stock, so I ended up using water. But I recommend using the former. It always improves soup. Anyway, bring it to a hard boil and then drop the heat to low, cover, and let them simmer for about 30 to 40 minutes until the peas break down and turn into this soft and creamy mush. After having the peas simmer for a good 20 to 30 minutes, get a skillet hot over medium heat with 2 tablespoons of olive oil. You're going to drop in your chopped leek and sweat it down until it becomes soft, sweet, and translucent. Just like we saw in previous episodes, the combination of sweet honey, sharp vinegar, and salty garum creates what seems to be the kind of flavor that Romans craved. Now, once the split peas are completely soft, use a wooden spoon or a potato masher to crush them into thick, rustic puree. Stir in your sweated leeks, pour in your garum and honey mixture, and toss your fresh chopped mint and parsley. Let it all simmer together on low heat for 5 minutes so that the flavors fuse together. Let's do a taste test on what kept 90% of Rome alive. Last quick fact, someone asked how food was served in a Thermopolium since disposable bowls and plates probably weren't a thing. Excavations actually show durable ceramic bowls and cups on the counters at Thermopolium, so it looks like mostly they ate it there or they had some kind of a return system. It's also believed that some counters would serve it bread bowl style as a way of having disposable dishware. So anyway, that answers that question. All right, well, here's our Vitellius Peas. Okay, kind of came out a little chunky. I guess I could add some water, make it a little thinner. All right, here we go. Vitellius Peas. Yeah, this is great. This one's pretty good. This is it's just split pea soup with a little bit different flavor to it. Yeah, there's like a very foreign tasting kind of seasoning to it that I'm not used to. The mint, yeah, the mint and the parsley are kind of like mixed in there too. But yeah, this is pretty good. I mean, I tried medieval porridge not too long ago. You should check out that episode. This is very similar, but also, yeah, good flavor. I'm gonna give this 7 out of 10. It's pretty good. Yeah, I would eat this again. This will definitely be leftovers this week. As always, my vote is only half the battle. The real judges are my family. If they approve of this ancient split pea soup, we've got a fantastic budget-friendly weeknight staple, and if not, I'll be eating Roman peas by myself all week. Scores are in the description. The real story here isn't Crassus torching his way to a real estate empire or Vitellius eating 4 banquets a day. It's that while those two clowns were busy being absurd, the people actually keeping this empire running got by on a bowl of peas named almost as an insult after the guy who couldn't stop eating. Rome ran on the people, history barely bothered to write down, and that bowl of peas is proof that they were doing just fine without the flamingo tongue. Thanks for watching Reheated History. Stay curious, stay cool, and the next time you order takeout, just be grateful you don't have to worry about your apartment complex burning down while you wait. I'll see you next Sunday for our season finale in Pompeii. The Romans that was hard.